This is the Global Podcast Network, where executives and professionals connect, share, and inspire. Stay tuned for the conversations that drive success.
Welcome back to the show. We are honored to have Dr. Lisa Johnson joining us here again. She's in private family practice as a family therapist, and she's also here talking more about her memoirs called My Relationship with Oprah, My Own Evolution to Restorative Justice. Excited to have her back here. And for today's topic, we're going to go over how did you apply your evolving dedication to restorative justice as you work to create your own family. In our last interview, Lisa described seeking a spiritual solution to her physical and emotional problems with food and applying those recovery principles to her work with domestic violence and child abuse. Lisa described how her parents and her sister Edie provided resilience factors and introduced her to the recovery path that she would put to use in her own life and work. Then on the 10-year anniversary of the assault, one of the convicted assailant's lawyers came to her door unannounced to ask for her support in his early release, but without any amends or apology from the harm done or to the community. On October 5th, 1980, which was the 10-year anniversary of the day you were assaulted, James Hill's lawyer approached you to ask your support for his early release from prison, as I just mentioned, after completing barber school during 10 years of his 30-year sentence. The lawyer did not offer Hill's apology or amends to you for the harm you suffered. Your experience with recovery in the 12-step program made you aware of the process for making amends, and this is not what the lawyer was suggesting. Although you had never heard of the term restorative justice, you still considered the possibility that if Hill would seek treatment and make amends, you actually might consider supporting his release. Now, at that time, you were already working as a therapist for families with sexual abuse, and you knew what types of treatment were available for someone like Hill. So looking back on that day, how did you manage, with your reaction to Hill's lawyer's visit?
Like I said before, it was really
Are you
striking
there?
because, yeah, can you hear me okay?
Can't
Can
hear
you
you
hear
now, sweetheart.
me?
Lisa?
Yeah,
There
I'm
you go.
talking.
Perfect.
All
Go
right,
for
can
it.
you hear me? Okay, gotcha. So, one of the ways that I coped with the visit is I just happened to have a friend of mine's that was right there with me on the phone when the lawyer appeared at my door. That friend of mine I had met through the 12-step program that I talked about before, and she continues to be a very close person, even though we live very far away and we hardly talk to each other anymore. But having that support of somebody with me right there in the moment was very powerful and really supportive, similar to what I experienced with my parents and with my sisters when I went through difficult things. I could look around me and find the people who were supporting me and helping me to find those resilient factors, to find that power to overcome. So she was with me. Her name was Jackie. She was there with me, and as I didn't really know yet some of the different things that were going to transpire that we'll get to later on. I thought the legal issues with Hill and Mays were over. And so I let it go at that point when he left my apartment that he wasn't, I didn't really think the Hill's lawyer was going to come back to me and say, oh yeah, we sought this treatment. And in fact, in Hill's case, he did finish his sentence and get released from prison on the regular terms, day to day. For every day of good behavior, you get a day off of your sentence. And that's just standard for anybody in Indiana at the time. But having the 12-step program with me and the support of the people around me gave me the start that I needed, and the belief that he could follow a different path. I myself was pursuing going to meetings. I'm the kind of person when I join when I get into something, I dive deep. So when I joined the 12-step program, I started coming to a regular meeting. When they asked me if I would lead a meeting, I said yes. When I asked somebody to be a sponsor to me, it was kind of a funny story because they say find a sponsor who has what you want and ask how he or she is achieving it. And I asked a person after the meeting if she could help me, and she said, "Oh, I'm really busy, but I'll help you in any way that I can." And so I started calling her and asking her how she was working the steps, and she would tell me what she had done. And then, and when it came to my fourth step and my fifth step, which you share with another person, I said to her, since you're my sponsor, would you like to hear my four step? And she said, I'm your what? She thought she had said
Hmm.
no to me. I thought she had said yes. So I was working the steps and doing service. And the program really worked for me because I worked it, because I showed up and I contributed. It's a self-help program. You get out of it what you put into it. So that's really where I got that foundation of restorative justice, the learning how to make amends, learning how to make an apology. That fourth through ninth step is learning how to take responsibility for the mistakes that you've made. And I learned how to do that there, and I learned how to help people do that in my work.
Oh, beautiful. Well, thank you for sharing this and really grateful about this, because you also said that your sister, right, is the one that kept following Oprah even when you lost interest in her shows. And then you were aware when Oprah covered topics that impacted your life, like on the Oprah Winfrey Show episode that was entitled Infertility Problems, which that aired May 25th, 1988, and features couples discussing their struggles with infertility. Can you tell us about your journey of infertility?
Yes, it's definitely was a journey of infertility, of determination, of faith, of try again. In 1988, when Oprah had that episode, I don't remember watching it. I looked that up to just get some information about what were some of the topics that she did cover that has affected my life, and this was one in particular. I got married in 1988, and when I was in the middle of my master's program for my marriage and family therapy degree, as you can imagine what that feels like to get married in the middle of your degree studying marriage and family therapy. It was quite the eye-opening experience to be in school while I was getting married. And then I got my master's degree in 1990, and that's when I worked for Midwest Family Resources, which was the agency that specialized in family treatment of incest. The director of that agency, Mary Jo Barrett, had written a book with my professor in undergrad, Dr. Terry Trepper, on systemic treatment of incest. So my full orientation is a systemic approach to treating sexual abuse within families. So my focus on my own life and turning into, being ready, we decided to stop preventing pregnancy and start trying to have a baby. And I had my first pregnancy test on December of 1991. And so I wrote in my Christmas letter how excited I was to have a positive pregnancy test. My birthday is January 5th. So on my 30th birthday, I was pregnant for the first time with my husband after getting married in 1988. I was so excited, looking forward to having a baby and getting established. And then I had a miscarriage 10 days later. That same OA friend that was on the phone with me when I was answering the door to Hill's lawyer was the person who went with me to the emergency room to make sure everything was okay after my first miscarriage. So that was the first of many losses that my infertility struggle came to. But there again, that 12-step program, the support of my community was there with me to help me through it. Um, Shortly thereafter, around the same time, had the storm sewers backed up into our basement garden apartment, and we had a foot and a half of water in our basement apartment. That flood and the miscarriage made us both think about where do we really want to be if we're going to start our family. So that summer, my husband and I took a road trip and visited the places where we knew some friends. We went to Kansas, where my friend Lynn, who had been the maid of honor in our wedding, was living. We came to Albuquerque, where our friend Gregory and Joyce were living. We went up to Colorado, where my aunt and uncle were living. And we then came back and we looked at the different places and looked at the different options for careers. My husband decided to go back to school, to graduate school, to become a librarian. And I started looking for jobs in New Mexico because we pretty much decided that New Mexico was the place we wanted to go. And so while Chris went back to graduate school and I started applying for jobs, I got my first job in Santa Fe. Now, this was back in the day when you didn't have a Zoom call. You couldn't do a Zoom interview. They sent me a list of questions and I videotaped myself with one of those little compact disc,
Oh, wow.
VHS, and recorded answers to the questions that they had. It was a community mental health center in Santa Fe, and they couldn't afford to send me out for an interview because it was a nonprofit. So I answered their questions and sent them a videotape of my answers, and they hired me without me ever meeting them. And I picked up and moved. We moved our whole apartment to New Mexico so that I could start my new life in New Mexico. And then while Chris continued to go to graduate school, and he stayed back and went to school and stayed at his parents' house while he finished school.
Wow. So once you decided where you wanted to plant your roots, how did the journey to New Mexico continue? Could you share that? And wow, and about some of these spiritual principles that helped you manage your new life once you got there.
Thank you. Well, one of the challenges was, here I loaded up everything to move to New Mexico to our new apartment, and emptied out furniture and put it in the truck. And the day that the truck pulled away, I had that same feeling that I'd had the first time I had my miscarriage, and that I was pregnant again. I was known within 5 days of conception that I was pregnant. And so
Wow.
stopped and got a pregnancy test on the way, got in the car to start driving to New Mexico. And of course, you're supposed to take the test first thing in the morning. And at that first thing in the morning, the test came out positive, even though there was a lot of blood in the bathroom. And I was having a miscarriage while I drove to New Mexico. At,
Ah,
and of course, then we had to have a snowstorm in the middle of driving through the Texas part. It was quite the journey to come to New Mexico. We took a futon with us so that I could sleep at my friend Gregory and Joyce's house. My
aw.
husband drive there. The furniture wasn't there yet because my apartment wasn't ready yet. But I spent that first Thanksgiving. We arrived in New Mexico. And then the next day, I spent the day in the ER to make sure that I was okay after the second miscarriage. And then that Saturday after Thanksgiving, put my husband on the plane so that he could fly back to Indiana to finish his graduate school. So that weekend was a significant amount of loss. I had lost
Yeah.
everything, moved to a completely different state,
Ah,
still hadn't met my new job yet, didn't have my apartment yet. But guess what? Across the street from the hotel, I mean, across the street from the airport hotel was hosting an Overeaters Anonymous convention, that 12-step program that I had gone to in 1988 because I was over 300 pounds. There was a community of support. I didn't even have to move my car. I walked across the parking lot from the airport to the hotel into a 12-step meeting and told them about all the things I've been through to get to New Mexico to come to this new place in my life. So again, the 12-step program surrounded me with support. Even these were complete strangers, I knew exactly where to go to get the care that I needed to get through that difficult period of time.
wow. Oh my goodness. So do you want to talk a little bit more about your family network, James Morris, the hitchhiker? Oh my goodness, there's
So
a lot.
So one of the things that often happened, like with my sister, the 12-step programs that I was in, I over the time I examined some of my other relationships with cannabis and with alcohol, and went to some of the other 12-step programs. And when I worked with other sponsors or any sponsor, I was often influenced by whatever they were studying in tune to their spiritual principles. And one of my sponsors was looking into Marianne Williamson's Return to Love, which is a part of the Course in Miracles. So I took that job in Santa Fe, and the place in the Family Network in Santa Fe. It was is has now blended into a place called Youth Shelters and Family Services. So it gives you a picture of what this kind of place was. They were serving the underserved, most impoverished people in New Mexico and Santa Fe, while people with lots of money were coming in to New Mexico and buying up property. People like Oprah Winfrey were buying up property. Oprah
Yeah.
still owns property in Santa Fe. So, people buying in property and driving up the tax rates so much that people who've lived here for generations, even since before New Mexico was a state, could no longer afford to live in their homes. And
Ah,
so I was working in an agency that was trying to serve those people. And yet here I was, a white girl from Chicago who was being asked to serve families that was, my culture, my background, the people I was with are very different from the people that the cultures here in New Mexico, and I just didn't know yet. I came from an agency that was very directive because we
mhm.
worked with incest. We became very commanding. We weren't afraid to use the legal system to enforce protection of children if that was necessary. And we used it as backup. And that really wasn't the approach of this particular agency. They practice narrative family therapy, which is like talking about your story and redefining what it means to you
Yeah.
by through conversation. And you just don't approach incest families that way. So here I was at work in Santa Fe, driving back and forth to Albuquerque to my apartment, not knowing that things weren't working out for me very well. And one day I was just turning, just like thinking, I don't know what to do. So I asked my higher power, like, I don't know, I'm driving from Santa Fe. It's actually such a beautiful drive to drive from Santa Fe to Albuquerque. The sun coming down in the evening over the mountains, just a glorious, big, huge sky experience. And I was like, I don't know what to do. Things aren't going well. What should I do? And I look, and there was a hitchhiker, and I decided to stop and pick her up. And when I picked
Wow.
her up, she said, "Thank you for picking me up. I'm so grateful you picked me up. I was just asking for guidance because I can't figure out what I should do. I'm
Ah,
trying to find this place, A Course in Miracles. I'm going to a week long at somebody's house, a week long workshop on A Course in Miracles, and I can't figure out how to get there." And so she showed me her directions, and I tried to get her there. And I called the person, and I could hear in the translation of what the person was saying into my ear, you have to take the street called Agua Fria. You have to go down
cold.
Paseo del Peralta. These words are Spanish words. And the person in my car was German. She was hearing those words and translating them and writing them on her notes like a
Wow.
German language would. Paseo del Peralta. How do you spell that in German? What
Oh
does that
yeah.
even mean? You.
Yeah.
So the hitchhiker was calling me all that week, and she really was like kind and responsive and open-hearted and like demonstrating all those principles of don't live in fear, live in love, and you can really trust. And so throughout the week that I'm struggling with, am I going to make it? She would call every once in a while and ask how I was doing. And I got kind of irritated. And then I discovered that, she just really cared, I guess. And so at the end of the week, she asked me to give her a ride to Albuquerque. And I did. And on the way home, she described that she had given up all her possessions and she was traveling around the world on her faith
Ah,
in
wow.
exchange for the services she can offer other families. People put her up and they feed her and they learn from each other and they grow. And then she moves on. And she didn't quite know where she was going to go in Albuquerque yet. And here I was struggling with whether I should invite her into my apartment by myself. This
Yeah.
lady who I had kind of known for about a week or so, complete stranger though. And one of the things she taught me was that there's only three things to fear. That, we're afraid of not having enough food. We're afraid of not being able to have a place to sleep at night. And we're afraid of dying. And, you can't decide whether you're going to die or not. Everybody's going to die. So you might as well kind of let that one go. And there's food everywhere. We
Mm-hmm.
live in a world of
So
abundance. We
true.
live
Yep.
in a world and a place to put your body is really all there is for shelter, a place to put your body. And for the most part, she was living on the kindness of others and in exchange for her kindness. And she really was living on her faith. And I really learned how she was putting those principles of a return to love that
Wow.
Marianne Williams was talking about in her life, just like my sponsor was talking about it in our 12-step groups and things like that. So it was this really fascinating, again, like many times in my life and in my story, connection between these experiences. And this is around the time that things I didn't quite know. Again, I still thought the legal stuff was over with the Hill and Mays situation. So
Wow, what a story. Thank you so much. And I want to, talk more about this, because this is your summer of employment. You mentioned food stamps. I mean, right? This is all the time now that Oprah had all these authors on, right? Like Marianne Williamson, who wrote The Return to Love. We can see, from your story, of course, Oprah's influence still impacted your experiences, even when you were not tuned into the show. Could you share a little bit more about what happened with this new position in New Mexico first?
When I was working in Santa Fe, the same day that I started looking at the newspaper and exploring, because I was
Mm-hmm.
traveling back and forth to Albuquerque, and I saw a part-time job available at the College of the University of New Mexico, and I applied for the part-time job teaching in the Family Studies department, which is where I got my degree from Northern Illinois University, not from UNM. So I put in a job for an application for this part-time job. And I got called into the director's office for a meeting, and I was fired for being too educational in my
Ah,
educational therapeutic approach. They basically said that my approach just didn't fit with the rest. It was actually the nicest getting fired I've ever had. It
oh,
was didn't we're not getting you past your probationary period because it's just
yeah.
not a good. And I spent a summer on unemployment, brought my husband back from his graduate school. He didn't have a job yet. I didn't have a job yet. And because I had come to New Mexico to take the job in and I qualified for Illinois unemployment and I qualified for food stamps. And I just didn't quite know how things were going to work out here in New Mexico. So far, not too good. Here we were, living in an apartment, not really starting our family quite yet because lost two babies, didn't have a home yet, didn't have a job yet, but my husband had gotten out of school. So we started applying for jobs. And guess what? I got that job at UNM teaching for the College of Education in the Family Studies department. So even though I was too educational in my therapeutic approach, I got a job as an educator. I got a job in the College of Education, and it fell right into alignment with, it was like my higher power was saying, it's okay, Lisa, you don't have to be like this kind of therapist in order to be a good enough therapist. There's a place for you. And there was a place for me here in Albuquerque, here in New Mexico. And a College of Education led to a lot of different things for me.
Yes, my goodness, for sure. I can't wait to hear what this job, what job in education, what was this?
So my first job through the College of Education was teaching for the department in their marriage and family relations class, which is the freshman level class of the Family Studies department. Now, one of the kind of funny things for me about my profession, about my degree, is my mother was a very staunch feminist. I told you before, we go back to generations of women's rights. My grandmother, my great grandparents, my both of my grandmothers were all about women and power and voting and when I went to graduate school to become a family therapist, I studied in the Department of Human and Family Resources. Well, before the 70s, those departments were called home economics. So I was getting my master's degree in home economics at Northern Illinois University. Think about it: child development, family studies, nutrition and dietetics, textiles and design. That's called sewing and cooking and childcare. That's home ec. So I got my master's degree in home ec, and guess what? At University of New Mexico, they also had another department called the Individual and Family Community Resources Department as a part of the College of Education, also formerly known as home ec, where I eventually, because was working for the university, decided to go ahead and take a class at a time and get my PhD in family studies. So you can now call me Dr. Lisa because I worked for the University of New Mexico, and the University of New Mexico offers free tuition to our employees. And so when I first got that job teaching as an adjunct faculty, it led to a full-time position working in their child development center, the Manzanita Center, which was the place where they had the education students come to study what kids do, which was just like what I did in grad school for my grad assistantship. So both of my employments paid both at Northern Illinois University as well as when I worked for the College of Education, paid for
Yeah.
my master's degree and my PhD. So those really provided, me to further develop. I wouldn't have a PhD if I didn't work for the
Yeah.
university. And I wouldn't have a PhD if the PhD wasn't really technically free. And I loved every class. I'm kind of like Hermione when it comes to class. Ooh, I have an answer. I love studying. I love education. So it was great. It was great for me. But it wasn't the end of our struggles in terms of family.
Got it. Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. And by the way, we are just about out of time. I'm so sorry. So we're going to have to kind of wrap it up. I
Yeah.
know we're not done with our notes and we got through a little bit. How do you want to kind of, end off for
Yes.
today?
Well, the as I moved to University of New Mexico, and my husband also got a job at University of New Mexico with his degree in library science. So we both were working at the University of New Mexico. And as I was working there full time, I continued to struggle with infertility, and we'll talk some more about that. And he also faced some struggles with suicidal depression. And we again turned to the 12 steps and the support of our community of network of the 12 the gift of the 12-step programs are the people who share their experience, strength, and hope in recovery, and really love and care for you and help you
Got it.
to comfort through it. So we'll get into some of that later
Thank
on.
you. All right. And
And
how can we
around
contact you?
You can reach me at my relationship with Oprah.com for more info, the other episodes of this podcast, as well as information of the book as it comes up.
Mm,
Or
Thank
for
you.
therapy, Lisa Johnson, LMFT.com.
Perfect. Thanks so much. Enjoy your day, hon. Bye bye.
This is the Global Podcast Network, where executives and professionals connect, share, and inspire. Stay tuned for the conversations that drive success.